Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to invite Bernd Gottschalk on stage. Bernd?
Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of this symposium, dear Dan, it's a particular pleasure for me to be at this symposium and even to say a few words. I promise you that I will not really touch on the historical overviews and historical aspects than just mentioned, and I will rather focus on the current issues of the transition to modern and sustainable mobility. As a former Daimler board member of commercial vehicles worldwide, as VDA president or as OICA president, I have had the privilege of giving so many speeches that you can be sure that I do it only out of the concern for this industry, which I have been able to serve for almost 40 years. I would like to thank Dan and APIA for the invitation, and congratulations also from my side. And I am happy to take the opportunity to speak here, as he mentioned, as a private person on current issues. But you can already be sure, hopefully, that my statements do not really differ from OICA, ACEA, or VDA positions. Perhaps I just can be a bit more blunt, a bit more outspoken. Let's call it that way. This accordance is important to me, as I said, after having been VDA president for almost 11 years. However, I cannot hide the fact that the reason for my sleepless nights is that the CO2 regulation and the political objectives behind it are not in line with the interests of consumers and to a large extent of the industry. As you know, this has serious consequences for the automotive industry, which is already struggling with the competition with China, the softening economy, and a declining demand for battery electric vehicles, whether for manufacturers or suppliers. And in my consultancy, I do a lot of work, consulting work, meanwhile for suppliers that are really suffering. One thing is obvious: the transformation has stalled. The risk that OEMs might miss their 25 CO2 targets is increasing, as we heard this morning. And to be clear, the entire European automotive industry continues to attach great importance to sustainability, no question about that, and is sticking to the Paris climate goals. Good. I also believe that in the long term, I also agree that in the long term, e-mobility will be the dominant technology for the large markets. Not for everybody, not for every market, but for the large markets. And as I said, we have to be clear. The entire European industry continues to attach great importance to sustainability and is, as I mentioned, sticking to the climate change. The powertrain, let me do it this way. The powertrain transition challenge remains severe. That's my main message. And the framework conditions for the Fit for 55 regulation have not been adapted, and above all, too little attention has been paid to the prerequisites for successful implementation, particularly the charging infrastructure. And in Germany, sudden and unexpected government incentive cuts were not really helpful. The goals are indeed very ambitious, And as we can see today, and not enough attention is being paid to the wishes of the consumer. They expect technological openness. The consumer has no problems at all with the coexistence of alternative powertrains, especially if these also have extremely low CO2 emissions. And the times of uncertainty about where the journey is going are so massive, meanwhile, even for manufacturers and suppliers, that it is time to get clarity. And that is why it is more than understandable that the associations see an urgency for the re-regulation, not in 26 for cars and in 27 for commercial vehicles, but in 25 for both, and as soon as possible. I mean, competitive energy prices, acceptable product prices for all social groups, prices of the structural impact on the manufacturer-supplier value chain, which has never been as endangered as today. The strategic availability of corresponding raw materials, which definitely cannot be resolved with the EU customs penalties, have all fallen by the wayside. Misguided subsidies have unsettled companies and consumers more than they really have helped. It is no exaggeration to say that the European automotive industry depends on the upcoming political decisions in the EU regarding the timing of the CO2, not the final targets, but the timing of the CO2 regime, the flexibility, the technological openness, alternative fuels, meaning the Renewable Energy Directive 3, or the timeline of transformation. Both of the following aspects must be ensured. On the one hand, to consistently achieve the sustainability goals, and on the other hand, to mitigate the structural disadvantages that we are currently experiencing, such as factory closures and huge job losses, not to forget to give consumer sovereignty more weight again. Therefore, the question of whether the current regulation is realistic or not must be openly discussed. The high fines that are already foreseeable for 22 are, I would even say, a threat to the industry and maybe sometimes even a threat to existence. Is the transformation too fast? Did we overlook the enormous amount of CO2 savings potential in the vehicle in use? I will come back to that point. Have we forgotten that the auto industry wants to be and must continue to be a key industry for Europe? And as we learned from John, for the United States as well, and for Europe with 13 million jobs, as we learned today again. I still find it difficult to understand why politicians have not yet made the path to decarbonize with technology openness. Prescribing technology has never been a promising path, not for cars, and certainly not for heavy commercial vehicles, which are subject to completely different conditions over long distances and with high payloads. I was impressed by the IAA transportation this year in Hanover, where you could see the technological answers, all of which describe the path to zero emissions, albeit using alternative routes. An e-truck is not an e-truck. One has central drive, the other has one e-axle, one e-motor, or 3 e-machines with a wide variety of battery concepts and cell chemistries depending on use cases, or hydrogen internal combustion trucks, or H2 fuel cell trucks. And also hybrid trucks will be on offer. The IAA has shown the industry has answers to the challenges. But where are the prerequisites for widespread use in reality? The charging infrastructure. Is green hydrogen available? Enough available? When will it be available? And finally, we must not lose sight of the fact that the truck users decide on total cost of ownership. We discussed the price differences this morning as well. E-trucks are extremely expensive to produce compared to ICE trucks. The passenger car sector has already shown us where higher prices or continuous margin pressure leads to. And for commercial vehicles, the powertrain accounts for 60 to 65% of the total manufacturing costs. Here too, re-regulation is urgently needed. For commercial vehicles or passenger cars, the question is not whether comparable innovations are available, but rather what is politically desirable. Regulations should keep the incentive for innovation open, provide a timeline that is realistic, and rely on an infrastructure that is built up in parallel. We need 8 times more charging points per year by 2030 to meet the CO2 targets. That is 22,000 per week in Europe, per week, as ACEA has calculated. And Mr. Vries recently correctly stated that there will be no mass market adoption of battery electric vehicles without a widespread availability of public charging infrastructure. And let's not forget, only every 8th charger is a fast charger. We need more fast chargers as well. So, and finally, my favorite topic. No, I have stolen this from Sigrid, but she has shown that already. So I skip that. And here is my point. I mean, you might know my DNA still is commercial vehicle, and therefore I want to touch my favorite topic. Why don't we focus on the high potential for CO2 reduction of vehicles in operation instead of focusing just on new registrations? I mean, we have 289 million vehicles on the road in the EU with a high potential for reducing emissions that could put industry and consumers out of the firing line, which has put them behind in terms of CO2 savings compared to other areas. As an old commercial vehicle fan, I have long wondered why Germany waited until April this year to release hydrotreated vegetable oil, HVO 100, which could achieve up to 90% CO2 reduction. And biodiesel is available. The power output is similar. The smoke emissions are even lower. The switch is easy. The fuel stations are prepared for it, and the additional costs are bearable. So this is just one example which shows that there is further potential for CO2 reductions for cars and trucks in use. We just have to do it. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in a crucial phase in realigning the automotive industry and adapting it to the needs of sustainability. The EU decision on customs penalty against China. I know this is a topic not everybody might agree, but I say the decision on customs penalties against China shows that more consultation with the key bodies in the EU is needed to set the right regulatory course. Realism is what is needed now. China is often cited, so we heard this morning, as an example where everything comes down to battery electric. In fact, the proportion of hybrids and range extenders is rising rapidly. Nobody writes that, but it is so. At present, it is 25% battery electric, 22% hybrids, last year 16. So still 53 combustion engines, and that is why I understand what I heard this morning about balancing. I think that's important. And more emphasis must be placed on public charging points, as I said, in Europe, which are necessary to achieve the CO2 reduction by 2030 required by the EU. More emphasis must be placed on implementing the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Regulation, APIA, nor should we pretend that nothing has happened in the past. Average CO2 emissions from new vehicles in the EU have fallen by 53.4% since 2005. So, don't say nothing has happened so far. And finally, we should not forget that the government itself benefits from the automotive industry, because the major EU markets have generated a fiscal income of 384 billion euros. I can only repeat once again, I agreed to what I heard from John this morning. I support ACEA's and VDA's appeal to implement the regulation as quickly as possible. And I also support the VDA's 10 points for climate neutral mobility, which clearly state that the goals must be actively supported with measures, and that the CO2 regulation is currently not sufficiently supported by political measures to meet them. You see, ladies and gentlemen, between the leaders of today's associations and an automotive veteran like me, there is almost no room for error. And if there are differences, I just apologize. Thank you very much.